Today on Die Trying, I'm going to show you how I made a table that sells for $2,500 online for only about $100-ish in materials, but it may cost you more. We'll get into it. Hold on.
Die Trying.
First things first, I had to see what I had in my junk pile. Like I said at the beginning, this only cost me about $100-ish, but it could cost you more depending on how much of a hoarder you are. Luckily for me, I hoard a lot of junk, so moments like this, I have what I need to build these projects. At the end of this video, I'm going to tell you exactly how much I made off this project, and I will give you a breakdown of all the costs and materials if you don't have any of the stuff in your hoard pile. But we'll get there, so chill, dudes, chill. I've had these big beams laying around for a long time, and I figured I could get them to work for this project with just a few simple cuts. All I did was measure this beam so that I could cut it directly in half down the long way, making each one of these legs 6 inches by 8 inches. I decided to go with 6 by 8 because that beam that I pulled out a little bit earlier was already cut to 6 by 8, and this beam right here was big enough to get 2 pieces of 6 by 8 material out of. A chainsaw is something that I really need to invest in. My parents have one and my dad was using it, so they let me borrow this tiny little one, which is a ridiculous thing to use to cut this beam in half. But I got the job done with that and a mix of my reciprocating saw. And I'm going to be squaring up all of these cuts afterwards. The messiness of this initial cut is not that big of a deal to me. But we'll figure out how to take care of that in a little while. Right now, let's get started on the top. 4x4s, one of the only things I needed to buy for this project. These are just Douglas fir 4x4s from my local home goods store. Alright, so I bought 5 of these Douglas fir 4x4s and I split them in half, and that gave me 10 total, and they're 4 inches each, that's 40 inches. I only need this to be 36 inches wide, so I only needed 9 of them. And once I had them all cut in half, I could start running them through my jointer. But real quick before we go any further, I just wanted to mention that I have shirts for sale. There is a link down below if you want to go check them out. I try to put up a new design every month. Anyway, go check it out. Back to the project. Then I could run them all through my jointer to make sure I had one flat side. Once I ran them through my jointer, I wrote flat on that one side so that I knew that that was the one I was going to be using for the bottom when I passed it through my benchtop planer. As you can see, I am doing right there. I put the flat side down as it goes through the planer, and that will guarantee that the top will also come out flat because it has a flat bottom to reference. Once I was done with that, I got out these pieces of a bed frame that I grabbed years ago. I use these to help make sure all of my glue ups stay flat. I basically use them as a call board. You put a board on the bottom of your glue up and a board on the top, and then you can clamp them tight and it will help hold everything nice and level. Unfortunately, the sun kept going behind the clouds and then coming back out, so this shot gets darker and lighter. My apologies. And there you go, you can see what I mean by the call boards. So I glued up one half of it, which was those 5 right there, and then I can come back and glue up the second half, which I didn't bother to show you because it's just the same process. And then I glued the 2 of them together to create this one large slab. I ran over to my local home goods store once again and I grabbed this router. I had a router for years that I had borrowed from a good friend of mine, and he eventually wanted it back, which makes total sense. So I gave that back to him, and I've been using this one from Harbor Freight that wasn't great for the past couple years, and just decided it was time to go get a new plunge router. And I went over to Home Depot and I grabbed this Ryobi. I was a little concerned because Ryobi tools have not always been the best tools for me, but this one had plenty of power and was able to help me flatten this entire thing. To flatten this, I just have a sled jig, as you can see right there. I just go back and forth over the top of this, taking off a little bit of wood at a time, and then once I have one side flat, I can flip it over and then repeat the same process on the other side. After that was done, I came home one day after the post office, that's why I'm wearing that uniform, and got to sanding it. I like to use my angle grinder with a sanding pad because it makes for very quick work. First thing I started with was an 80 grit sandpaper, and then I moved up a little bit at a time, all the way up to a 220 grit with this first pass of sanding. I used a black paint pen to fill in all of the seams that were low. I'm going to be filling those with epoxy, but I like the epoxy to appear black once it's all filled in, so that paint pen just gets deep down into the crevices, and then I can sand it back and remove all of the high spots. To cut off these sides and square everything up, I used my track saw, as you can see right there. And then I thought I was going to be using just my Japanese pull saw to cut this all nice and flat. Because the track saw does not cut deep enough to go all the way through this, I started that process and found it to be a big pain in the ass, so I just traced my lines all the way around this, and then I could flip it over and make another cut on the bottom half, and there we go. Nice and square. Alright, so these legs ended up being a pain from beginning to end, but here we go, let's get started on them. I thought I'd be able to just run this right through my planer and remove all of that bad cut from the chainsaw, but there's no way my shitty planer was going to be able to take care of all of this easily. So I passed these through my table saw, as you can see, and then that just left this little edge right here that I thought I'd be able to also remove with my planer, but honestly I think this planer just needs some new blades and maybe it would cut a little bit better. So I ran over to my father's house. He is the reason I'm into woodworking these days. He's been doing it my entire life, so he has all sorts of tools, and we share tools and wood and all of that. So I ran over to his house and used his electric Porter cable hand planer, and it made quick and easy work of this. Once I had them all squared up to the best that I could, I brought it home and changed the blade on my miter saw because it was dull as hell, and started cutting these 6x8s to their final dimensions. So these legs come all the way up through the top of the table, where you can see the end grain on the top of each leg. I really didn't have much of a plan when I had gotten this far into the project. I knew I'd figure it out, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet. So I set up my track saw, as you can see, and started making my cuts. I could only go as far in as the lines that I had drawn by tracing out the legs. I finished off the cuts with a combination of my reciprocating saw and my Japanese pull saw, so that I would not go past that corner and create any sort of bad cuts around the top of this table. I repeated this on all 4 corners until I had all of my spots cut out. And then it was time to make a jig to help hold all these legs together. This is a really simple jig. It's literally just a step. My router can run along the one side, while the other side gives me a spot to clamp this right onto the tabletop. Alright, so you can set your depth. See, this bar right here is loose. So you push it to your depth that you already cut. I happen to just cut this. And then I can tighten this. And then, because of that, it won't go any further. So we did our first one. Let's take a look. We're going to do that on all of these spots. So let's turn it and do the next one. I had to repeat this process on all of the spots where the legs will be attaching to the top. Now I could move on to doing the same thing on the legs. Because I set up this jig that gives me a repeatable cut on every cut, I know that the cut in these table legs will meet up with the cut in the top of the table, which you'll see in a minute. Alright, we got that one. Alright. And there you go. You can see I've cut these little dados into all of these legs on 2 sides. So now I can slide these legs right up to the corner, and the dado that I cut into the tabletop, and the legs will meet up perfectly, as you can see. Now I'm using my Craig jig right here just to get these attached while I do the rest of the work. There is no way that the Craig jig is going to be strong enough to secure these big legs on and keep them on throughout the years. So I basically just use them as clamps while I do the rest of the securing or attaching of these legs. I bought 5-inch long lag bolts and then pre-drilled these big 1-inch holes into the side. Then I could use my impact driver to drive these long lag bolts deep into the tabletop. That right there may have actually even been enough to hold this all together, but I wanted to make sure it was nice and secure, and I thought this would give a nice cool touch to the sides of this table. So those dados that I cut earlier will now be filled with a hardwood as you can see right there. I use my Japanese pole saw to just cut them all flush, then I could get to sanding. As you can see, the top of the table is really dark in that shot. I seem to have lost the shot where I burned the top of this. She had sent me pictures of what she wanted this to match color-wise, and I knew that this wood was going to have a darker undertone. I'm going to be sanding 99% of it off. It just gives a dark tone to all the low spots. With that done, I went ahead and filled all of the low spots on the tabletop with epoxy, and then it came time to do a lot of sanding. Starting with 80 grit all the way up to 400 grit. Take your time, sand a flat, even top till you have it so silky smooth. With my sanding done, I could apply a coat of this stain to help match the furniture she had already bought. And she had asked for a more raw look, so I just used some paste wax to seal this whole thing off. And there we go! This table was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be, but I am very happy with how it came out. Alright, now real quick, let's give you a breakdown of the material list and what I think it would cost for you to make this. I spent $70 on the 4x4s, $10 on Craig jig screws, $13 on stain, $20 on paste wax, epoxy was another $20, lag bolts were $6, and the big 1-inch dowels to fill the holes were $8. Now, the beams for the legs, that's the hardest part to get at a good price. I have a sawmill fairly close to my house where I could go pick up a 6x8 beam, 8 feet long, for only $65. Like I said, this only cost me about $100, but if you had to buy all of these materials, you'd be looking at somewhere around $210. With this project posted online for $2,500, you're still making a hell of a profit. I'll be totally honest with you, I did not sell mine for that much. This is a good friend of mine. I sold it to her for $500, but I also only had to spend $100 in materials, and I love building stuff and I love posting stuff, so I'm always happy to make a project. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and if you made it to the end of this video, try one of these here or somewhere here. Anyway, we'll see you in the next one. Love you all so much. Goodbye.
Bye, see you again, and have a good dream.